Welcome to the Second Bite Podcast, where we talk with top entrepreneurs and CEOs about creating valuable companies through creative transactions. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome back to the Second Bite Podcast. Today, I have Jeremy Cornfeldt with us from Brainlabs. Jeremy, I am super excited to have you on here. We got a bunch of stuff that I want to unpack, and I thank you for spending a bunch of time with us today.
No, thanks so much for having me, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I've got a bunch of questions to get into. I want to first say a quick thank you to our sponsor, which are the people at TeamShares. I don't know if you know TeamShares, and you probably don't, but I've done a transaction with TeamShares. They are a private equity group that, in most of their transactions, they don't pay the highest. They pay closer to the lower end. They're 100% cash at close, 90% cash at close, a little bit of equity. But the neat thing about them is they've got a plan that over a 7-year period of time, they intend to get a majority of equity into the hands of the employees of the company. So we did a transaction back in January with them. My guy had owned his digital agency for 40 years. He got 90% cash at close. He's got 10% equity that pays him out in 3 years. And his employees that he's been with for a long time will own that business in 7 to 10 years.
Wow.
Sounds way too good to be true, right?
No, that's a different model, and actually a great, that equity piece is huge for the staff.
And everybody knows that these guys, and I thought it was too good to be true. They were great to work with. We got a really good transaction done. Again, it was their first digital transaction that they've done, and they are not at the higher end of the value range, but in the right circumstances, they're a great acquirer. Teamshares.com. If you want to talk more about them for any of the listeners, I'm happy to chat with you about it. You can get my email address on the show notes. So, Jeremy, you have been in and around digital marketing, really, I'm going to say, for your entire career. Give me a quick summary of that and take me right up to the good stuff, which is what you're doing now at Brainlabs. And if you can, you were the man at iProspect, right? You were the president of iProspect, and then you leave a big ship to go to a much smaller ship. Tell me about that.
Sure. So appreciate you saying for almost the entirety of my career. Maybe I'm a little bit older than I look. I hope that's the case, Todd. But I've spent my entire career pretty much in professional services. So the 30 seconds on it as I was at a management consulting firm. I was then at Anderson Consulting before it became Accenture. And then in the late 90s, I jumped into the digital marketing space and went to a startup. That startup, and so I was on the acquiree side. I was bought by Cara at the time, which was part of Aegis. And so starting in 2001, I was part of Aegis, which then, as most of you probably know, became Dentsu. So I spent a lot of time on the digital media side in Cara, did a little time on the offline media side, and then went into a holding company role in Aegis. And that's where I really started to get more actively involved, not only in new business, but in doing acquisitions. And then I moved into iProspect and took over the helm at iProspect in 2013. And while I was there, I was very fortunate to, we really scaled the agency. We were about 220 people when I started and well over 1,000, close to 1,500 when I left. And we did that through new business growth, organic growth, and then was also fortunate enough to be able to do 4 acquisitions while I was there as well. So that really helped accelerate our growth too. So then in the beginning of 21, I'd said it was time to do something different. Holding company environment was very good to me. I really appreciated my time and my career there. But it also can be quite challenging. As most of your listeners probably know, holding companies grow through acquisition. And what can happen is you can have a lot of overlap, and your swim lanes of where you are become very narrow. And so it limits your ability to either build a new service or buy a new service. and you need to drive growth, but your growth lane is very narrow. So I was very interested in coming over to an independent, especially an independent that was private equity backed, because I could paint with a bigger brush. I could start to go into areas where I just wouldn't be able to do that at iProspect, being part of the larger Dentsu network. So I moved over to Brainlabs in 21. I've been there for almost about a year. I oversee North America. We have, as you had asked in one of our previous conversations, Todd, we have about 300 people in North America now. We have probably around 750 globally. We have big ambitions both in the North American region as well as around the world. Acquisitions are a key part of our strategy, but we have a slightly different approach. And our agency is a performance marketing agency. So, we, for our clients, are driving sales, leads, reservations, some sort of action within their digital ecosystem. What's also exciting about us is that we work on both SMB type clients, and we have a portfolio that's set up just to manage those clients. We have about 80 SMBs in North America, and we also have big enterprise clients. We have about 27 enterprise clients, and we have a portfolio just to manage those. And we work with names that you've heard of. We work with Walmart, we work with Capital One, we work with Thermo Fisher, we work with Mars, Bed Bath and Beyond. So it's nice to have a great mix of both.
And when you say SMB, what size are you talking about there?
Well, so what's interesting with that is it could be a single service for a big company. So, for example, we work with Godiva. We just do their SEO. I'm not going to share their fee, but it's a relatively small fee. But it's a great account. We got it from a partner, and I'm glad to have that. It's a great company. That's just what they want from us right now, and that's fine. We also have companies that are just starting up, that don't have huge numbers in terms of annual revenue or huge numbers in terms of spend. And we're happy to take on those clients as well. And we want to help them grow and give them, the benefit of having bigger agency services and capabilities as they start to scale their businesses, and also price it in a way where they can afford it, but it still works for us as well.
Right. So I want to talk about Brainlabs in a second, but let's go back, if we can, to iProspect.
Sure.
I have a couple of questions there. Number one, when you were at iProspect, how did an acquisition candidate, how did it bubble up to you, to your level? Number one. And number two, when you would see a potential acquisition, what would cause you to be interested in one and want to pass on another? Was there something immediate, something you saw on the deck, something that happened in the first phone call? Any tips there would be really helpful.
Yeah, sure. So the larger holdcos, as you can imagine, they have fully built out M&A teams that are out there hunting. So they're looking for acquisition opportunities, but more often than not, they are bringing those companies in to the network as a standalone entity. Unless they either find an executive sponsor, someone running a brand like I was, or they, an executive sponsor says to them, "Hey, I'm looking for someone that can do X, Y, Z." So that was one way we would get introduced to acquisitions. The other way is, I would build out my strategy each year with my executive team, and as part of that, I would proactively, say these are the types of capabilities that I'm looking for, and we would agree on that based on what we were seeing in the market, what the needs were from our clients, and I'd proactively go out and hunt as well myself. I've always found that even if I don't know the founder or have any connection to the business, if I'm reaching out to somebody cold, and this is a hats off to all the founders out there that are open to this. Every founder or CEO of a business that I've reached out to has always said, yes, I'd be happy to have a conversation, even if they weren't ready to sell or weren't thinking about it. And so,
So
I was,
those conversations now. You have an intro conversation with a guy about whatever.
yeah.
What's the thing that maybe is an immediate turnoff that when you have that conversation? But more importantly, what's something that kind of triggers in your mind? Is it just the right services? Is it something about the entrepreneur or the founder that you talk to?
Well, usually, and I have to say, I haven't had anything in an immediate conversation, but I know where you want to go with that. So I'll definitely have some thoughts on that and things that didn't play out. But nothing in an immediate conversation that has turned me off. I always, if I've had enough interest to say, "Hey, I want to learn a little bit more about your business," um, regardless of how that first conversation goes, I will usually want a follow up meeting, and it will be, what I've read on the site, any insider information I can find out from, people in my network, clients that they claim to work with that might be listed on the site. But there's usually something where the company fits some sort of a profile based on my broader strategy, and has some capability that I think would be interesting, useful, beneficial for my client base, and where I'm trying to grow the business. Um, and then I want to just take some time to learn more. So founders have always been good about being open to a meeting, and we'll be upfront. And I would always say, like, look, be interested to have a conversation about partnering with you or potentially acquiring you, and just be open about it right up front. And it's usually led to a follow up conversation, and then from there you can start to determine, is this something where I want to continue and spend more time to understand the business.
And then at Brain Labs, you mentioned in your comments earlier that things are a little bit different in terms of what you're looking for and then what you want to acquire, what you're going to do with them after acquisition. Tell me a
Sure.
little bit about that.
Yeah. So I can't speak for all holding companies. I can speak for where I was at, but my understanding is this is the way it plays across all of them. The holding companies are always going to be measured based on profit growth. That's what their shareholders are going to hold them accountable to. Now, obviously, most companies are going to be evaluated that way. But acquisitions become a key lever for holding companies to use to drive profit growth. And they also do not have to record the acquisition cost on the business P&L, but they can recognize, depending on the time of the year that it's done in their fiscal, a portion of that profit. So it becomes an immediate way to accelerate growth over the course of the year. They also then typically do the earnouts based on mutually agreed upon profit growth metrics. So how much is your EBITDA going to grow over 2 to 4 years? And sometimes these earnouts can be really long. So founders, from my perspective, can be incentivized if they are measured on EBITDA growth to constrain the business, to stretch it as much as possible to maximize their earnout potential. At Brainlabs, it's a bit different. We're focused on buying capability. We don't want, we want to minimize the amount of overlap that we already have within the business. So if we're looking to buy a capability, we either have a capability that's nascent, we haven't been successful with it, we don't have the right talent. There could be a variety of reasons why it hasn't taken off, or we just haven't built it, and we figure that buying is probably a faster way to get there, and also a way to ensure that we've got some depth and expertise if we buy the right company. Then our earnouts are shorter. We like to do them around 18 months, and they're focused on revenue. Now, I don't think that there's any perfect formula for an earnout, but at least with revenue, we're all trying to drive growth, and you're incentivizing the founders of the business to be focused on growth, which I think is going to be the most important thing. If you get the revenue in, if you're driving that growth, we're all business professionals. We can manage the costs appropriately and ensure that the business is running profitably. But without the revenue, it becomes really, really hard. So I always struggled with the holding company model. And also the length of the earnouts was a real detriment in terms of driving integration.
Well, I think you've seen that in a lot of the acquisitions done at all the holding companies, right?
Yeah.
And as we always tell our clients, the earnout incentivizes you for a certain behavior.
Yes.
And it's well understood that that's the behavior we're going to get for that period of the earnout, right?
Right.
So, and it's interesting with a private equity backed firm, unless you're going to sell Brainlabs in 2022, private equity is a little bit less worried about what your EBITDA is in this year because we don't have to report it to anybody.
Right.
So if we're just going to focus on top line growth, let's focus on top line growth because we know that the EBITDA will eventually get there, right? If it's priced accordingly, and if we have to do a little bit more to get it there in the early years, we'll do a little bit more to get there in the early.
Right. For sure. Yeah. And it's also, it's great because you have people marching in the same direction. So one of my mentors always used to say to me, is like, in the agency business, you can always find smart people. Go to any agency and you're going to find smart people. That's not the trick, is finding smart people. It's getting all of those smart people marching in the same direction. And that's when you're going to have something that's really successful, which I think is the most important when you're doing an acquisition. You have to get everybody aligned really quickly. And if you can have, if you're incentivizing people on what you're trying to do as a business, then you're all marching in the same direction.
And so at iProspect, or let's just say any hold company, there's some challenges to doing that.
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen for the seller, right? For that founder, CEO, entrepreneur? What do you find that their biggest, most difficult adjustment is post-transaction? And how are you solving for that at Brainlabs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple things for any seller. Right? The first thing is, and look, I know a lot of founders have worked in other big companies before they maybe have started their own business. Most have had different experiences before they've launched their own business. But you are now coming in, and you don't have full decision-making authority anymore. And especially when you're in a larger holding company, you're going to have more constraints put on you than you were probably used to. And I think what I've seen with some founders is that they feel like that can limit their ability to be agile and be nimble and to move and make decisions quickly. So I think that's a big adjustment. The other thing is that, understandably, these larger corporations will have a different way of how they track accounting, how they manage costs, of how they ensure that they have central resources that are providing different services. And that can be a bit more expensive than what a founder is used to. IT costs, healthcare costs, whatever the case may be, it might be a bit of a jolt to the system. So I think those are big adjustments that founders have to make when they come in, or a seller has to make when they come into a larger holding company. I think the biggest thing, probably the most important thing, is that, especially when you're going into a holdco, the idea of going into a Dentsu, to a WPP, to a Publicis, to whatever, and you see these big name clients, it's like, especially if you're the founder of a smaller business, it's like, yes, I have wanted to play on the stage with P&G, with Unilever, with Microsoft, with Apple, with whomever. And I think the hope is that the floodgates will open. And now, there's this new kid on the block, there's this new player in the network, and I'm going to get marched into, so-and-so CMO's office, and they're going to love what I have to say because clearly their agency loves what we've had to say. And now I'm going to be, selling my services into companies that I've always dreamed of playing with. Doesn't play out that way. It rarely ever plays out that way. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but it takes time. And I think the most important thing is to map out what are the low-hanging fruit opportunities, like where are there going to be some immediate wins? And they're going to be very few. So if you get a list of 20, you probably convert 3. And it's setting your expectation on that. And then to get into the bigger opportunities, plan on, it's going to take 12 to 18 months, if not more, to really get people, especially in a holding company network that's really complex, to understand what it is that you do, your value proposition, how you differentiate. And it takes time, just like it would take time to break into a Unilever or a P&G. It takes time to mine those relationships.
When when's a good time for a seller to want to start doing that? Would it be during due diligence when they're doing diligence on you? Would it be a good time to say, "Hey, where's our low hanging fruit opportunities," or is that hard to do?
I don't think it's hard to do during diligence. It's not necessarily where I would focus. I think the thing, from my perspective, the thing for a seller to do during diligence is to make sure that whatever you are laying out in terms of future financial performance is achievable by you doing it on your own. That's probably the most important thing. You can map out, I'm going to drive, 30% growth year over year for the next 3 years. Have a plan of how you would do that yourself. That's the most important thing. Then when you get in, or if you can do that during diligence or post the close, then you can start to map out, okay, I know what I need to do to achieve my earnout. I know what I need to do to drive my growth. I have a plan, and my team has a plan on how we're going to do that. Then you can either allocate a portion of your own time or send someone in from your team that's going to start figuring out how to mine the opportunities within the network. And then that becomes the icing on the cake.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. And I'm going to ask it open ended so I don't lead the witness here. If somebody, if you're looking to buy a business that is providing you a specific capability, let's say it's SEO in this case, you need SEO, and so you like this business.
Mhm.
And if that entrepreneur said to you, I'm going to grow the business, my projection, 15% each of the next 2 years. Or they said, we're going to grow it 25% each of the next 2 years.
Mhm.
You pay any more for that business based on what their projections are?
Well, I mean, yes, you would. You would pay more. They would be able to earn more on the earnout. So there's going to be a multiple against both their revenue and their profit achievement. So for the seller, um, my advice is make it as realistic and as achievable as possible, so you know what you're signing up for.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what, so the conversation I have with my clients is this. If Jeremy's interested in you because they need SEO capability,
mhm.
and you've done 2 million a year in EBITDA and then 2.2 million a year, if you project that out now to 2.4 million and then 2.6 million, right? That's pretty reasonable. And he's
Yeah.
going to pay you because you did 2 million and 2.2 million, right? Because that's the value of the business today.
Mhm.
If you project it to 2.5 and then 2.8 million, to think you're going to get more today won't happen. But now you've set higher expectations for the future to get to a bigger number. If you set
Correct.
the number lower, oftentimes you can even outperform that number and still get paid the same amount without
Or more. You might
or
get an accelerator on it. So there's that aspect. And look, I think it is a juggling act, because, and it's just like when I do my budgets and work with, the global leadership that I report into, and same with my team. My team will say a number, I'll say a different number. We'll come to some sort of negotiation on what we think is um, aggressive but achievable, and the same will, it goes bottom up and top down the whole way through. And I think that's the same process that the sellers need to go through. I think in my experience, what I've seen with sellers is they want to show an aggressive number because they think that's going to be most attractive to the buyer. And from a buyer's perspective, yeah, I want to see something that's aggressive and shows growth. That always helps my case when I'm, looking to raise the funds or ask for approval from a larger network. But at the same time, the acquisition is going to be successful if it hits its targets. I mean,
right,
that's going to be one of the key measures of success. And whether it was when I was at Dentsu or now at Brainlabs, we want to pay our earnout.
right,
We want to pay it. We don't want to have someone come in and not achieve their
right. Because
targets.
then nobody looks good.
Yeah,
Do
then
you
nobody looks good.
so when you see, and you've seen plenty of decks in your day, when you see a deck, do you discount that future growth that they projected at if it takes the big hockey stick, or do you kind of take it with a grain of salt and you create a deal to accommodate for that?
Well, yeah, that's always an interesting one, Todd. I mean, what I what I do when I see that is, well, what's the plan? Like, how are you going to get there? Sort of break down the mechanics of if you're going to show 50% growth and you've never done that before, like all of a sudden, what's different? What's new? And the answer can never be, well, now I'm going to be part of your organization.
Right.
Because then there's too much reliance on the buyer to now make this a success.
Yeah.
So that's what I never want to see. But if they're showing that kind of growth and they have a clearly laid out plan, then I'm not necessarily focused on the growth. I'm focused on the plan and either buying into it or poking holes at it or understanding what the dependencies are, whatever the case may be.
Beyond, that's a great answer. Thank you. Beyond economics of a transaction,
Mhm.
why does it make sense for an entrepreneur to do a deal with Brainlabs? What
Mhm.
what what do you solve for them that's a difficult solve for a smaller agency or marketing firm to do when they're independent?
Yeah. So I think from a Brain Labs perspective, it's kind of there's multiple things, and I will get to the answer to your question, but I want to give it some context. When we do an acquisition, um, the entity that we buy becomes Brain Labs. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight. You know, we might have a 6 or a 9 month transition period, and it might be name of said company by Brain Labs, but eventually becomes Brain Labs, and that's part of our strategy because we want to have one presence to the market. We don't want to create any sort of confusion and ensure that all the capabilities are housed under our umbrella. So a seller needs to be comfortable with that going into the transaction. Why that's important and why I wanted to give that context to answer your question is because what they get when they come in with us is, we just bought a business, for example, that is a leader in mobile app download and usage, and they're really big in the gaming space. And for their clients, they're driving acquisition and adoption of a lot of their titles. They don't have a robust search capability. They don't have a robust SEO capability. They don't have a broader strategy team that helps with consumer insights and the journey. They don't have a lot of things that their clients are starting to ask them for. So they become part of our organization and boom, they plug into this immediately and now can start to change the nature of the conversation that they're having with their clients. And that becomes really exciting for them because um, it's hard. And every seller, founder, CEO, however you want to classify them, knows this. It's hard when a client says, "Hey, can you do this?" You have to say no.
Right. And then you're letting the enemy in the door. Right.
You're letting the enemy in the door. You're letting the client down. You immediately know that word that you just said to the client opens you up to some level of potential risk.
Yeah.
And so I think for a seller that becomes part of Brain Labs, a lot of them do it because, they're ready to take their business to the next level. They believe in the direction that we're going in. They see the synergies between our organizations. And, they know, as we know, that this is going to help get them there faster.
That's great. When you review a deck,
Mhm.
beyond the here's our capabilities and here's our a little bit about our financials. What are the 2 or 3 things that are most important that you want to be able to learn from that deck?
Mhm. Well, I think the couple things that I want to learn, and sometimes you don't always see this in the deck. So I want to learn what makes them special, and sometimes what makes them special isn't necessarily the case studies of what they've done for a client. I mean, by nature of case study, you're always going to show something good. Like I haven't seen anybody that showed me a case study that said the results weren't good.
Right.
I want to understand what makes them special. Where do they have depth and experience in whatever it is that their business is focused on, and why have they been different and well received in the market. That's the first thing. Um, the second thing that I really want to understand is how have they been able to drive and grow business? That's really important too. What's been their mechanism to do that? And everything from, we have a robust content calendar and we're pushing out, content multiple times a week, and we have a great social media presence and we go to every conference and all that stuff, all that to, what, we have a great network, our board has a great network, and we've been leveraging that. I want to see all of the sort of scientific and then not so scientific ways that they might be driving growth within their company. The other piece that I really enjoy seeing, and I think it's important, is understanding their view on the market and where they think the market is going, both within their service and in the broader, digital ecosystem, because that becomes a great way for me to understand, do our would our unified vision align, and will we uh, will we be good partners in marching, as I said before, marching in that same direction.
What do you think about when you see, going to the, what makes you special?
Mhm.
When somebody says, we spend the time to really understand our clients' needs and objectives, or, you know, we've got a world-class group of people here that are, top engineers, something along those lines.
Mhm. Um, those are all nice things to say, and everybody says them. So
It's not a point of distinction, though, right?
right, it's not a distinction. I mean, yes, of course, you want to understand who the people are, and you do want to meet the people because you are buying the people, and that's really important. So I don't want to discount that, but every agency says that, and I think what I challenge our teams to do, and companies that I advise is what you just said. Everybody can say, "What can you tell me that's different?"
Yeah, and be
What
specific about that.
Yeah, and be really specific about it. Um, and it might be something as simple as, say, if it's a paid search agency, we have just created a different way of setting up the account structure, and it's X, Y, and Z. And because of that, we know our performance has been better than the competition. And every time we've taken on a new client, we see an uptick in performance by X. And it's consistent across the board because our account structure is unique to us.
It's interesting. That's a great example. One that comes to mind, I talked to an entrepreneur one time who sold his agency very successfully. And their point of distinction is they paid their salespeople more than probably anyone else in the industry. They gave them very limited customer accounts.
Hmm.
And each customer would make up like 25% of their revenue.
Hmm.
And so when they were selling, they said, listen, if this relationship doesn't work, Jeremy's going to lose 25% of his income this year. Jeremy's been with us for
Yep.
5 years. Jeremy doesn't, because that's one of the pain points is that these account reps turn over again. They got to educate the new guy, and nobody knows what's going on. And
Yep.
so they really drilled down into that and did
Yeah.
that very successfully.
One of the businesses that I acquired, I won't say their name, but it was one of the last acquisitions that I did when I was at Dentsu, had a similar model. And not only that, they didn't even title their people with director or manager. It was, you were level 1, level 2, level 3, like that's it. And everyone knew at different levels what your salary band was, and they knew what your commission opportunity was. So you could quickly work out, I could quickly work out, Todd, I would, if you were level 5, what your salary band was and how much revenue you're managing in your pod and how much commission you're making off of that. And it was very transparent culture. It created somewhat of a cutthroat culture. So there was a bit of a drawback to it. But at the same time, it's very high performance culture. So everybody they brought in knew, like, you controlled your earning destiny, if you will.
Yeah. We're working with a
And
great company right now that's in the social space. And the CEO there says, everyone talks about this is a great family and everybody loves everybody.
Mhm.
My guy says, we are a sports team. we are based on performance. Every
Mhm.
player on the team loves every other player. If you can't hit 250, if your batting average sinks too low, if you're not getting on base, we need people that can hit the ball,
Yeah,
right? We can
exactly.
still love you, but you're going to have to leave. And it creates a culture that people can relate to
Hmm.
and understand.
Yep.
And they have great retention for their people
Hmm.
because people know coming in, this is the environment I'm getting into. And if you
Yep.
want something softer or more cuddly or something different, you just go somewhere else, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So in the transactions you've done, I'm sure you haven't closed on all of those.
Hmm.
What do you see as maybe the most common mistake that sellers make, either preparing for due diligence or going through the due diligence or the legal process, from getting from LOI to actual deal close? Is there something that repeats itself over again?
So the one thing that always repeats itself is that almost every seller I've come into contact with underestimates the amount of work that goes into it.
That's sure.
And I'm sure you
40
see,
hours, it's a big time job, right?
yeah, and I'm sure you see that quite a bit in your line of work, Todd. So every seller underestimates the level of work, and more often than not, most sellers then it's not so much that they can't handle the work or they're not prepared for it, but something suffers and the business suffers.
Right.
So the big advice to a seller is you're going to be taken away from business day to day. You have to have a backup plan of how the business is going to continue to run and be managed properly, so that when the transaction's over, because it's always going to take a little bit longer than you would think,
Hmm.
that you don't have a huge mess on your hands that then starts, your new relationship with the acquirer off on a bad foot
Right.
because you've
So
taken your
right. And what I see oftentimes is founders are concerned, almost afraid to bring other people into that tent that we're
eye.
going to get a deal done in
Hmm.
case the deal doesn't close.
Hmm.
So they have to grab all that work for themselves,
Yep.
right? So that tends to be a problem. And what we've seen in practice for those that get comfortable with it is it the people that they bring into that circle of trust early? Because everybody talks about the rhetoric, right?
Yeah,
You're
of course.
trusted, we love you, you're important, you're a critical player here. This is a really good time to share that information with a select few and to
Yep.
offload some of that work
Hmm.
and to share in the burden of that because it makes it healthier for example, heaven forbid the deal doesn't close, you don't go through a big dip.
Yeah.
When the deal does close, that you're hitting this in full stride as
Hmm.
opposed to being exhausted from working 30 hours a week on the deal and 50 hours a
Hmm.
week in the business
Yep.
and so on from that standpoint.
Almost every business that I have acquired, whether it was at iProspect, even here, has seen a dip in performance when they first come in.
That
And
first quarter.
as a buyer, you don't want it, but I've been conditioned to expect it. But I
Yeah.
do think that you can mitigate it if you handle it properly. And I think that that is true. Sellers go through this. I don't want to tell a lot of people. It's going to create upheaval, and I'm going to be worried that key people might leave or something like that because they like the environment. Whatever. There's a whole
Yeah.
variety of issues that can come up, and they're real, and I get that too. But um, you can't ever underestimate the amount of work that goes into due diligence. And just like with construction, it never goes away.
Yeah. Yeah. So last couple of questions. At Brainlabs now,
Hmm.
what do you think is near and we're in the springtime
Hmm.
of 22.
Hmm.
As we sit here now, what are the top couple capability sets that you would like to be able to add to your roster?
Yeah. So for us, the capability sets, specifically in North America, they differ in different markets around the world for us. But for me, email is at the top of my list. Um, I think it's a really sticky service. I think it's a great complement to the work that we already have.
Is there
Uh,
any platform on email that you're attracted to, Klaviyo or something else?
No, it's not necessarily the platform. I'm more interested in the services around it.
Yeah.
Uh, and how people are approaching it, how they're using a client's first party data, using their database to activate, and how it ties into the broader ecosystem that we're managing from a media perspective. Um, Affiliate and influencer, and I couple them together, even though I know that they are separate. So I'm not trying to insult one or the other, but there are a lot of synergies between those two. Are also businesses that I am interested in, as well as conversion rate optimization. Another area that I'm interested in now. We have, as Brainlabs, bought a CRO business in the UK that's done really well. We're also getting very close to closing on uh, an influencer business. So there is the opportunity that I could import those capabilities here. But even if I were to do that, an acquisition again helps to accelerate that, and sometimes finding synergies between an existing acquisition that we've done and a new one can be a 1+1=3 situation.
Right. And I know this will come off as self-serving, so I'll ask it anyways. So you get a blind email from some guy or woman that has an email services business.
Mm-hmm.
How likely is that it's going to filter through all the emails that you get, and that they'll be well prepared, and that will happen to turn into something?
Just like with just like as I said in the beginning, with the cold calls that I would make to founders, I always look at everything that comes through. Um, just more often than not, it's not a business that I'm necessarily interested in acquiring, or a capability that I'm interested in acquiring that time. But if it comes through from a founder or from someone like you, I always look.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that
Relationships are always better, I suppose.
relationships are better, and if it's something that's of interest, I'd absolutely take a look.
For somebody that is considering and wants to do a transaction,
Mm-hmm.
is there a piece of advice, if you would put it at the top of the list, that you would pass on to them to be successful in that endeavor?
I don't know if there is one piece of advice, but I'll try
You
and
can do more than one if you want. That'd be great.
I'll try and keep it short. Well, we've talked about a lot, so be realistic about your growth. Um, uh, Walk in with the expectation that to achieve the full value of your business and earn out, if that's the way that the acquisition is being done, that you need to be able to do that on your own. Do not count on the buyer to help you do that. But the most important piece, and we sort of danced around this a little bit, Todd, but it is a cultural fit. There has to be that cultural fit, because if you don't feel like the culture of your organization fits into the acquirer's organization, it's going to be a huge challenge. I say to our teams when we're pitching for new business that I think our clients buy three things from us. I think they buy subject matter expertise, trust, and likability. And I think it's the same thing for an acquisition.
That's a great point.
We want to acquire. Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, how do you determine the cultural fit? Is it by the words? Is it by the mannerisms? Does it take until you get in front of them?
It is until you get in front of them, and even during this time of COVID, as much time as you can spend, whether it's on the screen or the acquisition that the latest one that we did, I flew out to San Francisco just to have dinner with the guy, because I wanted to get to know him, and he wanted to get to know me, and that type of cultural fit is going to be important. Now, the challenge always is that whether it's on the buyer side or the seller side, there's a limited number of people that are usually involved. So you are taking that leap of faith, that trust, that the cultural aspects that you are seeing in the leadership team of the company that you're going to buy, or the company that you want to become a part of, are pervasive throughout the entire organization.
Right.
So that is a leap of faith, but typically the culture does come from the top.
I completely agree. I've always believed that one of the great things about entrepreneurs in the size that we serve most often is that their business is a reflection of who they are.
Yeah.
Right? So I think if you get the quality of the founders, you see that reflected in the people that they attract and are attracted to.
Yep, exactly.
So let me end with this. You've been very successful in your career, professionally, and in your community and with your family and the rest. Is there something that you would point to that you would attribute a lot of that success to? Is there a mentor, or is there a book that was influential, or an experience that you had that you would point to and say, this helped shape who I am today?
There's been so many. I've been so fortunate throughout my career that I've had a lot of people influence the directions that I've gone in. I guess I could leave it with three things. One, very early on in my career, there was a woman that I worked with, and I would do resourcing for client projects, and everybody wanted her to work on their client project. And they would choose her, and she was only 26, over people that had 15, 20 years more worth of experience. And I would say to her, like, Siobhan, why does everyone want you on their business? And she said, people know that I will take on something that's never been done before, and I'll figure out a way to get it done.
And tell me,
I've always tried to adopt that of, I'll figure out a way to get it done. And
what was her name?
Her name was Siobhan.
Siobhan.
Yeah.
Can you say her last name? Should we?
I'd rather not say her last name just because I don't know.
Siobhan will know who she is. You can forward this to her.
Yeah, she will know who she is. So there was that piece. Second piece of advice that I got was, and I can say his full name, was from David Verkland, who used to run Aegis in the Americas and in APAC for a period of time. And David used to say to me, know what people think about you before you walk in the room. Know all the good, know all the bad, and play to your strengths. And
good one.
That was a really good piece of advice. And the final piece of advice was from Nigel Morris, who was a mentor of mine, and I reported to Nigel, and he also ran Aegis in the Americas for a long period of time, really helped turn us around. Nigel was fantastic in a new business pitch and really understanding how clients would perceive what you would say. But he would say to me sort of two things: never believe your own press. And he would also instill, especially in me, simple is better. If you can tell, especially in the space that we're in, you can break down these complicated concepts into the most simplest form, that's going to yield the best results.
That's great. And this has been a wonderful episode, Jeremy. It's great that you shared as much as you did, specifically as you did. There's tons of great insights in there. So I will say thank you for that. Your contact information and all is in the show notes, so people can reach out to you there.
Absolutely.
They can find you on LinkedIn very easily. I'll say thanks again to our friends at TeamShares for being our sponsor. And it's been great having you, Jeremy. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me, Todd. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Second Bite podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.